The Zolthrian Empire had seen it all. They had dominated entire star systems, dismantled civilizations, and absorbed the most advanced species into their vast war machine. Their empire stretched across galaxies, and their victories were etched into the stars themselves. It was their way: conquer, control, and move on. And yet there was one planet that had always slipped through their grasp: Earth. The Zolthrians had heard stories of humans, of their unrelenting drive, their unpredictability, and their strange defiance in the face of seemingly certain defeat. Earth, though technologically inferior to most of the galaxies they had conquered, had a reputation for being dangerous. No one knew why or how, but there were whispers. Some species spoke of humanity as reckless, others claimed they were impossible to understand, and some even said they were simply too wild to be subdued. Zolthrian generals had long debated an invasion of Earth. Many questioned whether it was worth the risk, but the tales of human resilience and resistance kept them cautious. These stories reached the ears of the highest ranks of the Zolthrian military, a race that prided itself on understanding every possible enemy before launching an attack. However, what baffled the generals most wasn't Earth's military strength, but something far more profound. Time and time again, Earth had been marked as untouchable, without a single shot being fired. Why? That was the burning question that lingered in their minds. Curiosity finally overcame caution. A group of high-ranking generals, veterans of many intergalactic wars, decided to take matters into their own hands. They launched a covert mission, an observation from the safety of their hidden base on Earth's moon. It was to be a simple reconnaissance mission: observe, gather intelligence, and determine if humanity truly lived up to its fearsome reputation. There would be no direct engagement, no risk of exposure. The goal was to gather enough information to decide whether Earth could be subdued, or if it was best left untouched. The generals expected to find a world preparing for war. They anticipated seeing harsh military drills, cities fortified for battle, and a people hardened by the constant threat of invasion. Their scanners zeroed in on key locations across the planet, places they believed would reveal the human capacity for war and defense. But what they found was not what they had anticipated. As their surveillance began, they were surprised to see humans going about their lives without a care in the world. No massive military displays. No war machines rolling through the streets. The humans seemed calm. Among the various feeds, one caught their attention. It wasn't a military base or a center of political power. It was something far more mundane, a suburban area, where a group of young humans were playing. At first, the Zolthrians were confused. Why were they watching children? These young humans were engaging in some kind of game. At first glance, it appeared chaotic, running, yelling, laughing. But as the generals watched closer, something clicked. The children weren't simply running around. They were simulating tactical maneuvers, setting up traps, using their environment in ways that suggested deep strategic thinking. They were playing a game that seemed to mimic combat, and it was called Peril. The generals watched in silence. At first, they couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. These were not trained soldiers. They were children. And yet, they were displaying an awareness of their surroundings and a level of strategy that rivaled some of the advanced species the Zolthrians had conquered. What perplexed them most was the joy. The children weren't engaged in these activities out of survival or fear. They were doing it for fun. Laughing, chasing, diving headfirst into what the Zolthrians considered dangerous situations. To the generals, this was beyond baffling. How could a species allow its young to engage in such perilous behavior without concern? What possible purpose could this serve in the grand scheme of humanity's evolution? For hours, they observed. The children constructed rudimentary traps out of everyday objects, jumped from heights that would have incapacitated other species, and seemed to thrive in what the Zolthrians viewed as dangerous scenarios. And yet not a single one of them showed signs of fear. They laughed in the face of peril, embraced it, and kept coming back for more. One of the generals finally spoke, breaking the long silence. "These are not soldiers. These are not warriors. These are children. And they play with danger." Another general, more seasoned than the rest, shook his head slowly. "No. They don't just play with danger. They embrace it. They thrive in it. Imagine what their adults must be capable of. The realization hit them hard. If this was how human children behaved, treating perilous situations as mere games, then what must adult humans be like? What kind of species raises its young to see danger as fun? A chilling thought crossed the minds of the generals. They had faced countless enemies, some of whom used fear as a weapon. But humans, it seemed, had no fear. Or if they did, they had learned to turn it into a game, a challenge to be overcome, not avoided. The generals exchanged uneasy glances. What they had witnessed had changed their understanding of Earth entirely. This was not a species to be taken lightly. This was not a planet ripe for conquest. The Zothrians continued to watch, fascinated and unsettled. As the hours passed, they observed the children engaging more deeply in their game of Peril. The game itself appeared to be a bizarre mix of strategy, daring stunts, and an almost reckless disregard for safety. The generals were struck by the complexity of it. At first glance, it seemed chaotic, but the longer they watched, the more they realized there was structure, rules, tactics, and a sort of unspoken communication among the children. They set traps for one another, using their surroundings with surprising efficiency. One child would charge toward a group, forcing them to scatter. Another would use the distraction to lay out an ambush. They jumped from heights, rolled across the ground, and dodged obstacles with ease. All the while, their laughter filled the air, echoing through the surveillance feeds. To the Zothrians, this was madness. Children, so young and yet so bold, had no fear. They treated peril as if it were a toy, something to be played with, explored, and mastered. One particularly daring moment caught the Zothrians' attention. A child climbed a tree, far higher than any other species would dare at that age, only to leap down without hesitation into the arms of another child below. The precision, trust, and fearlessness on display were unnerving. The Zothrians debated among themselves, trying to make sense of it. One general speculated that perhaps humans had evolved differently from other species, that maybe they were born into danger and had developed an instinct to not only survive it but to enjoy it. Another suggested that this was some form of training, a way to prepare their young for the harsh realities of life. But that explanation didn't quite fit. These children weren't training, they were having fun. Whatever this was, it wasn't about survival, at least not in the conventional sense. One of the more experienced generals finally spoke, his voice laced with caution. "This isn't about training," he said. "These humans are conditioned from birth to embrace danger, to face it without hesitation. They see peril not as something to be avoided, but as a challenge to overcome." His words hung heavy in the air. The other generals were silent for a moment, absorbing the implications. If even their children were fearless in the face of peril, what did that mean for adult humans? Were they, too, so casually dismissive of danger? Were they conditioned to see risk as simply part of life, something to be embraced rather than feared? The thought was deeply unsettling. The surveillance continued, and the Zothrians' unease only grew. They had never encountered a species like this. Other civilizations they had conquered were predictable, cautious, and often easy to manipulate through fear. But fear seemed to have no place here. These human children weren't just facing danger, they were actively seeking it out, and they were enjoying it. At one point, one of the children stumbled and fell while running across the uneven ground. The Zothrians watched closely, expecting a cry of pain or fear. But instead, the child laughed, picked themselves up, and continued playing as if nothing had happened. This was incomprehensible to the Zothrians, whose own young were carefully sheltered and trained from a young age to avoid unnecessary risks. The more they watched, the more the generals realized that humanity's reputation wasn't based on their military might or technological prowess. It was something far deeper, something ingrained in their very nature. Humans, it seemed, were different. They didn't shy away from danger, they leaned into it, played with it, and in some ways mastered it. The Zothrians found themselves at a crossroads. On one hand, these were just children, untrained and inexperienced in the ways of war. On the other hand, The behavior they were witnessing pointed to something far more dangerous. If human children could treat Peril with such casual disregard, what did that say about the adults? What did that say about humanity as a whole? One general voiced what the others were thinking. If this is how their young behave, we cannot underestimate the adults. They must be far worse, far more dangerous. It was an uncomfortable truth, one that the Zolthrians weren't fully prepared to accept. They had come to Earth expecting to observe a species either ripe for conquest, or too primitive to pose a real threat. What they found instead was something far more complex, far more dangerous than they had anticipated. As the children continued their game, the Zolthrians grew increasingly uneasy. They had never been afraid of any species before, but watching these children play with danger, as if it were nothing more than a game, made them question everything they thought they knew about humanity. It was as if peril was woven into the very fabric of their existence, not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. The generals exchanged uneasy glances. The mission, which had started as a simple reconnaissance operation, had taken a darker turn. They had hoped to gather intelligence, to find a weakness they could exploit. But what they had discovered was something far more troubling. Humanity, in all its unpredictability, was not to be trifled with. These children, in their innocence and fearlessness, had shown the Zolthrians something they had never encountered before, a species that did not fear danger but thrived in it. The realization began to settle in. If human children could face peril with such ease, then the adults must be a force unlike anything they had ever faced before. The Zolthrians had seen enough. They had come searching for answers, and they had found them. The only question left was what to do with this newfound knowledge. The Zolthrians couldn't let this new revelation go unchecked. The generals, still in disbelief at the resilience and fearlessness of human children, needed more data. Speculation wasn't enough. They had to understand the full extent of humanity's relationship with danger. The question remained, were these behaviors anomalies or was this fearlessness an ingrained part of human development? Determined to find out, they decided to deploy a reconnaissance drone. The Zolthrian technology was advanced, undetectable to most species. It would observe the children more closely, collect their physiological data, and analyze their reactions to various stimuli. This was the next logical step in determining if humanity's young were truly the precursors to something far more dangerous. The drone descended from the moon base, cloaked and silent, equipped with the most advanced sensory technology the Zolthrians had. It hovered above the playground, capturing every movement, every sound. The Zolthrians watched as the children continued their game, blissfully unaware of the device above them. The generals, however, were growing more curious with every passing moment. Suddenly, one of the children noticed the drone. At first, the generals tensed, expecting the child to run in fear or sound an alarm. But instead, the child pointed at the drone and laughed. The others quickly joined in, treating the drone as though it was another part of their game. The Zolthrians were confused. Why weren't they afraid? The children began trying to catch the drone, their laughter ringing through the air as they chased it around the playground. They devised new strategies on the fly, coordinating their movements in ways that baffled the Zolthrians. It became clear that the children weren't just chasing it at random. They were working together, communicating silently through gestures and glances, using their surroundings to corner the drone. Despite their best efforts, the drone couldn't outmaneuver them. It wasn't designed for this kind of interaction. Its primary function was observation, not evasion. Within minutes, the children had cornered the drone, surrounding it in a way that left no room for escape. The Zolthrians could hardly believe what they were seeing. Human children had just outwitted their advanced technology. One of the children jumped and grabbed the drone, pulling it to the ground. The others cheered, high-fiving and laughing as they examined their new toy. From the Zolthrians' perspective, it was a disaster. The children were tampering with the drone, unknowingly transmitting jumbled data back to the generals. The signals were garbled, full of static, but one thing was clear: the children had no fear of the unknown, no hesitation in handling something that could easily have been dangerous. To the Zolthrians, this was further confirmation of what they had begun to suspect. These children, untrained and unaware, had the natural instincts of warriors. They treated every challenge as an opportunity, every risk as part of their play. The Zolthrians could only imagine what these same humans would be like when fully grown, trained, and prepared for real battle. The generals watched in silence as the children continued to play with the drone, taking it apart piece by piece. Every attempt to recover the device was futile. The more the children interacted with it, the more data was lost. But in that loss, the Zolthrians found something far more valuable than raw data: insight into the human psyche. This encounter revealed something fundamental about humanity. They were adaptable, fearless, and quick to exploit any advantage, no matter how small. The drone had become just another part of their game, another challenge for them to overcome. And they had done so effortlessly, without fear or hesitation. The generals exchanged uneasy looks. This was no ordinary species. The implications were staggering. If these children were a reflection of human nature as a whole, then humanity's potential as a threat was far greater than they had ever imagined. The Zolthrians were skilled in warfare, but they relied on fear as a tool, fear to control, fear to dominate. But humans? Humans, it seemed, had no fear, at least not in the conventional sense. They welcomed the unknown, embraced danger, and even when faced with a technological threat they didn't understand, they met it head-on with curiosity and confidence. The longer the generals observed, the more unsettling the realization became. The children's actions were instinctual, yes, but they were also highly coordinated, displaying a level of teamwork and ingenuity that was unexpected for their age. If even their young could dismantle advanced technology and turn it into part of a game, what would an adult human army be capable of? One of the generals broke the silence, his voice quiet but firm. "This is not a species we can control through fear." The others nodded in agreement, each of them processing the implications of what they had witnessed. Fear was a universal constant in their conquests. It was their most reliable weapon, the force that bent entire civilizations to their will. But here, with humanity, fear seemed to hold no power. The Zolthrians were beginning to understand that Earth, and its people, were unlike any enemy they had ever encountered. It wasn't just their resilience, their adaptability, or even their fearlessness that made them dangerous. It was their ability to turn the very concept of danger into a game, a challenge to be embraced, not avoided. The generals knew they were out of time. The mission had revealed more than they had anticipated, and now they had a decision to make. They could continue their observations, gather more data, and try to find a weakness in this strange, fear-defying species. Or they could retreat, take what they had learned, and mark Earth as off-limits, a planet too dangerous to conquer, not because of its technology, but because of its people. As the children continued to laugh and play, oblivious to the monumental decision being made by the alien generals above them, the Zolthrians began to prepare their retreat. This encounter had shown them that humanity, with its strange relationship to peril, was not a species to be trifled with. Even their youngest were capable of facing the unknown with a boldness that defied reason. And with that realization, the Zolthrians knew that an invasion of Earth would be more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. They had seen enough. The Zolthrian generals sat in stunned silence, each grappling with the implications of what they had just witnessed. The mission had taken an unexpected turn, revealing a side of humanity that none of them had anticipated. These were children, and yet they had demonstrated a level of fearlessness and tactical intuition that rivaled seasoned warriors. If the youngest of this species could behave in such a way, what must the adults be capable of? The decision wasn't one they could make lightly. Conquering planets was routine for the Zolthrians, but Earth was no ordinary planet. The generals reviewed the data they had gathered, cross-checking it with the intelligence they already possessed. Earth's technology was far inferior to theirs, that much was certain. But technology alone had never determined the outcome of a war. What truly mattered was the spirit of the people who wielded it, and humanity's spirit, as they now understood, was a force to be reckoned with. It wasn't just that the humans lacked fear. The Zolthrians could handle species that lacked fear. They had conquered many in the past. But this was something different. Humans seemed to thrive on danger, to treat peril as an opportunity rather than a threat. They didn't just survive in the face of danger, they embraced it, learned from it, and, as the generals had now seen, turned it into a game. The generals convened one last time to discuss their next move. The conclusion was becoming inevitable, but none of them wanted to admit it just yet. The Zolthrian Empire prided itself on its dominance, on its ability to crush any resistance, no matter the foe. But Earth? Earth was different. To invade Earth would not be a straightforward conquest. It would be a war unlike any the Zolthrians had ever fought. And the cost, they now realized, might be too great. The eldest of the generals spoke first. If what we've seen here is representative of the human species as a whole, then we cannot proceed with an invasion. There was a murmur of agreement, but the younger generals, those eager to prove themselves, were less convinced. These were children, one of them argued. Untrained, undisciplined. Surely the adults can't be as unpredictable. The eldest general shook his head. That's precisely why we should be concerned. If their young can handle peril with such ease, imagine what their soldiers must be like. Humans don't respond to danger the way other species do. They don't retreat. They don't hesitate. They engage with it, adapt, and find a way to turn it into an advantage. That makes them far more dangerous than any species we've faced. The room fell silent again as the weight of his words sank in. The generals knew he was right, even if some of them were reluctant to admit it. Humanity's reputation had long been one of resilience and unpredictability, but now, after seeing it firsthand, they understood that those qualities weren't just rumors. They were deeply ingrained in the human psyche. Another general spoke, his tone more measured. Our strategy has always relied on fear. We break our enemies by exploiting their weaknesses, by making them afraid to fight back. But humans, they don't respond to fear the way others do. In fact, they seem to grow stronger in the face of it. If we invade, we won't just be fighting a military force. We'll be fighting a species that sees danger as a challenge to overcome, not something to be avoided. This was the crux of the issue. The Zolthrian Empire had built its dominance on its ability to control its enemies through fear and intimidation. But Earth would be different. Fear, their most reliable weapon, would be useless here. And without it, they would be forced into a prolonged conflict, one that could stretch their resources thin and expose them to vulnerabilities they had never faced before. The discussion continued, but it was becoming clear that there was only one logical course of action. To proceed with an invasion would be to risk everything, and for what? A planet that, while strategically important, was far from their most pressing concern. There were other, easier conquests to be had. Earth was simply not worth the risk. The eldest general spoke again, this time with finality. We've seen enough. Earth will be marked as unapproachable. No invasion. No further contact. The younger generals didn't protest this time. They had all seen the same thing. Humanity, with its reckless fearlessness and its ability to adapt to danger, was not a species they could conquer through conventional means. It wasn't just that the humans were brave or resilient, many species possessed those traits. It was their ability to turn peril into a tool, to face the unknown with a mixture of curiosity and confidence, that made them truly dangerous. The Zolthrians began the process of retreat. Their mission had yielded results, though not the ones they had expected. Instead of identifying weaknesses to exploit, they had found a species that could not be subdued in the traditional sense. The human children, in their innocence and playfulness, had shown the Zolthrians something profound. Earth was not to be trifled with. As the generals prepared their final report, they couldn't help but reflect on what they had witnessed. Humanity's capacity for survival was extraordinary, but more than that, it was the way they embraced danger that set them apart. The Zolthrians had conquered planets through fear, through intimidation and brute force. But Earth was different. Fear would not work here. And without fear, the Zolthrians had no clear path to victory. The final decision was made: Earth would be left alone, marked in their records as a world too dangerous to engage. The Zolthrians would move on to other conquests, leaving humanity to its own devices. But the lesson they had learned here would stay with them. Humanity, with all its flaws and unpredictability, was not a species to be underestimated. And while the Zolthrians had chosen not to engage, they knew that someday, perhaps in the distant future, they might have to face humanity again. But for now, Earth was safe, and the Zolthrians would move on, wiser for the experience. They had seen firsthand the strength of the human spirit, and they knew that to fight against such a force would be a battle they could not easily win.